European Workshop Week. This is a topic that is top of mind for everyone, and I think that this is going to be a really interesting way to learn from a couple of different perspectives what's happening in this space as we think about how do we address the vulnerabilities of our power system today and also plan for the power system of the future. I'm Morgan Scott. I lead EPRI's Sustainability and Ecosystem Stewardship Group, and also just started leading our new Climate Ready. Ready stands for Resilience and Adaptation, I for Initiative. And I'll be able to speak a bit more to what that is later in today's session, but really looking forward to all that is to come here at EPRI over the next 3 years as we think about climate resilience and adaptation. Now, today's session is, I love this, not a spectator sport. I know it's really easy to turn off that camera and just sit back and multitask, but we really encourage you to be active and to participate. The sessions earlier today were really engaging. Hopefully you were able to participate in those, and we really want you to be a part of this conversation. EPRI is built on the collaborative model. We believe in the importance of having everyone in the conversation so that we advance the dialogue in a way that really understands all viewpoints. So having you participating in the chat, adding your questions in, interacting with the speakers will really make today's event a success. Now we have a full lineup today, which is fantastic. And what I love is we're gonna start with climate. We're gonna start with the data. And we've got Chiara Cagnazio, who is gonna join us to talk about what they are doing at the Copernicus Climate Change Service when it comes to understanding climate data and allowing that to inform our thinking of how we evaluate potential vulnerabilities on the energy system. And then we get to dive into company perspectives. And I'll introduce our speakers from Enel and National Grid when we get there. And then we'll bring it back. We'll think about what does this mean for Europe, and then what does this mean for EPRI as we move into our Climate Ready initiative. Now, for us at the Institute, we have a number of high-level strategic priorities that guide the way that we evaluate and evolve our research portfolio. And as you can see, reliability and resilience are one of the 5 major research priorities that we have mapped out. And so as a part of that, our look at climate vulnerabilities and climate resilience is one of the areas that we really focus in on here, given many of your own experiences and what we have seen with member companies that participate in our research with us. And these pictures probably aren't that shocking to you, right? We have seen really significant weather events over the past few years that really underscore the need for us to think about what are the impacts of these extreme weather events from an acute standpoint. But there's also a piece here around what does chronic climate change look like? What is the environment that the system will be operating in many decades from now going to look like? To what extent can we understand that? What's the uncertainty behind that? And how do we use that to plan for the future? So this is very much about what we're focusing in on today, climate resilience, resilience to the acute impacts, but we also do not want to lose sight of the adaptation piece of things, right? How are we adapting for a changing future? Now, where does this go when we talk about the European perspective? So the European Environmental Agency did a high-level analysis of climate-related risks to the energy system. And so what I love here is it's a nice, clean mapping of potential positive as well as challenges to the energy system when we think about a changing climate. And what this underscores is just the need for this type of conversation and the need for more research so that we can understand not just what needs to be done, not just what are the suite of opportunities to address vulnerabilities and to advance research that can help us with this future-looking planning, but also how do you prioritize that, right? How do you actually choose and select those investments? And we'll talk a bit more about that later as well. But today we get to focus in on just these things. So some of the questions that I'll plant in your mind as we get this conversation started, and we'll get a chance to kind of touch on these in each of the different presentations. But, you know, what is the power system of the future going to look like? And will it be resilient to the environment within which it will operate in 2030? And frankly, I'll push beyond, right? What do we need to do to evolve these networks, and what are these resilience goals going to actually look like? And what happens if we don't adapt proactively, right? What happens if we're not investing in the system in a way that helps us to be more responsive to both extreme weather events as well as chronic climate change? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Eamon, who is going to share a little bit more about a project that we did here at EPRI as a lead-in to our first guest speaker. So I'm looking forward to this. Welcome. Remember that you have the ability to drop questions and comments in the chat. And Eamon, why don't I let you take it away? And don't forget that double mute.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Morgan. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, my name is Eamon Lanoy, a colleague of Morgan's based here in Dublin in Ireland, and from the grid operations and planning team here at EPRI, and there's several more from the team here on the call. And so before I jump in, I'd like everybody to ask, I'd like to ask everybody to just find your way to the chat and then introduce yourself in there. Just we know your name, it's in the participant section. We'll just let's say who you work for, what you're with, and what part of Europe you're in, let's say, just to get the chat rolling. So as Morgan said, we really want you to feel part of this today and get stuck into the conversation. So again, as Morgan alluded to, our understanding of the future risk posed by changing climate is really grounded in the data that we can put together. And by way of illustration, I wanted to just demonstrate a study that we recently completed. It was focused around Los Angeles County. Based in the US, obviously, and there's ample other studies that look like this that have started to kind of piece things together. And so this one's just a nice demonstration, so that's what I want to show you. On the left, you can see one climate scenario, RCP 4.5, and then on the right, you can see RCP 8.5. They correspond to differing climate scenarios in the future with different emissions outcomes in both of those scenarios. And so what we wanted to understand is, in the world that presents, what does that mean for the transmission system? And you can see a change in, for example, the likelihood of wildfires. And wildfires, bushfires underneath transmission are a major reliability problem that need mitigation, need to be considered in investment planning, in operations, and so on. So understanding, as we make these big investments in transmission to facilitate renewables and to maintain reliability, understanding what does that look like over the lifetime, the 40, 50, 60, 70 plus year lifetime of that asset, becomes increasingly important, especially if you know that the future is going to, or may substantially change from the past. So here you can see under different scenarios, different probability of wildfire, and that puts different transmission lines at risk to a greater degree. And that would be something that you would need to consider as part of an investment planning process. So to get a result like this, it actually needs to step back. So to produce the result, you need a picture of what the weather looks like, or future weather will look like, future climate will look like, and that starts with data. And then from data, we can build on a picture of what the future network looks like, what those assets are toleranced, designed to withstand, where they might go, how they might be laid out, and so on. And then we can understand how they might perform through simulation with the power systems analysis tools that we have right now. But coupling all this together is a big job. And again, several have tried to start it, or made inroads in doing so, started to think about investments. But really, we need to be seamless with that power systems analysis back through asset design, topology layout, and then back rooted in climate data. And so to start our discussion today, what I wanted to do was, we thought it was very important to start with the data, as Morgan said. So we reached out to our friends at the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting. I think I got that right. would correct me if I'm wrong, and Chiara Cagnosa there, they have, as part of their remit, a lot of really cool tools that the energy system can use to do the types of analysis, and are starting to use it, especially looking back historically. But Chiara is here to maybe explain what the Copernicus Climate Change Service is and how it's relevant to energy systems, and to bring that to the front of our thinking as we start to get into the world of assessing climate resilience. So, Chiara, it's a pleasure to have you. I'm going to make you the presenter here now, and I'll pass it over to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this nice presentation, and good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so as you were saying, at the Copernicus Climate Change Service, my role is to make climate data closer to different applications in different sectors, and of course those are sectors that are sensitive to climate variability and climate change. And the Copernicus Climate Change Service is one of the 6 thematic services of the Copernicus program. That is the European program that looks at our planet for the benefit of all citizens. Let's say the development of renewable energy sources is, of course, a key step toward the decarbonization of the energy system. And this is a crucial step toward the net zero objectives of the European climate strategy. But this is also very important or essential if you think of the EU energy independence. And let's say the fraction of renewables in the energy mix has increased over the last decade, will continue to increase, but the system integration remains a challenge, and this is due mostly to their volatility. So if we want, for example, to develop, to operate, to maintain a renewable power system, we need, of course, a clear understanding of the impact of the current climate conditions, but also their potential changes under climate change scenarios. So in order to support the energy transition, information about the climate is crucial. And this because mostly on the one side, the climate change and climate variability affect the supply and the demand of energy. So you may think, for example, how last year there has been a quite significant reduction in winds for the Northern Europe countries that are amongst the largest producers of wind energy, with, of course, kind of an implication on the wind power generation. That you can also think of other situations, like, for example, a warm winter lead generally to reduced energy demand. So another aspect that is not mentioned in this slide and is not part of this presentation is the other aspect, that's the fact that information about the resilience of the energy infrastructure to extreme events needs, of course, also data. So the energy transition has to be put in the context of a general transition of our society toward a low carbon economy. So in 2020, the 27 EU countries, in the EU 27 countries, the energy fraction from renewable has for the first time exceeded the one generated by the fossil fuel. And that's quite a promising step, or promising news, but of course it's also quite tying. And this is also one only aspect, because energy infrastructures are exposed to climate extremes. And we remind that if we look at the period between 1980 to 2020, climate-related extremes were causing almost 500 billion of damage in Europe. And so somehow there is also this strategic role of renewable energy in climate change adaptation and in mitigation adaptation strategies. So at the Copernicus Climate Change Service, we offer data and information that is tailored to the energy sector. And this information is completely online, it is open access, it has been co-designed with a community of users. And of course, any of the material that is free of use may be used, reused, shared, tailored in order to find further downstream solutions. So it has to be considered really a kind of a starting point. And the information covers different timescales, and it is presented in this seamless way. So this means that even if the information is extracted from kind of very different timescales and very different source of data, it is presented to the users in the same way. And so the timescales are the past to the near real time, the near future, so what expected to happen, for example, in the next 6 months, or even going further and giving outlooks in the long term. And of course, we are talking about different typology of data. So which kind of data are we talking about? So first of all, we are talking about weather and climate information related to wind, related to solar radiation, related to temperature, related to rainfall, but also energy-related variables like energy demand, potential production for solar, wind, hydropower. And this information has been really built together with a community of users that needed a kind of disintegrated multi-timescale view of the climate and the energy system, but also needed the consistent information across different areas for looking at impact of climate on energy operations, on management, on planning. And I would like to say that it is true that often this community needs information at the local scale, but it is very important to put the local information in the context of a larger scale. Which is the methodology behind the information that you can find on the climate data store on the Copernicus Climate Change Service. So really fastly, the information starts from information, of course, on climate variables from the past. And this information has to be robust, has to be high resolution in many cases, and it has to be consistent across many different areas. And it has to be also in near real time, and it also has to be quality assured, following standards. So the first choice is for our service to make use of what we call the reanalysis. I will tell you in a second more. They are called ERA 5 reanalysis. And then those climate variables of the past are transformed into energy variable by using a combination of statistical model and physically based models. And this is done by using also a comprehensive set of measured energy supply and demand data. And then, of course, there is a calibration of the energy model that is done over the historical period. And then finally, energy indicators are extended to cover the periods of the future. So I have mentioned as a starting point specific information about the climate and climate variables, and then mentioning here climate of the past, climate of the present, but also climate of the future. And so the first set of data that I have mentioned is the data related to the past. So here I'm referring to this reanalysis global dataset ERA 5. This is a global data set for climate variables, meteorological variables, available in near real time. And this is a data set that combines model data with observations across the world into a globally complete, consistent data set that uses the laws of physics. So in practice, they reconstruct the entire meteorological conditions and climate conditions of the past with no gaps in space and time for for number of variables. And this image is a quite powerful image of the reanalysis. You can see on the left-hand side, there is this iconic view of the planet Earth taken by the Apollo 11 mission in 1969 on the 20th of July, when it was orbiting the moon. And then on the right-hand side, the reconstructed weather at that exact time from the ERA 5 reanalysis. So this data set is available from 1950 onwards with 1 hour resolution and many atmospheric variables. But space resolution is also a key aspect, and this global data set covers certain needs. But it's quite considered at the coarse resolution for several applications. It comes with a 30 kilometers resolution. So at the Copernicus Climate Change Service, we offer also reanalyses that are at a higher resolution. This is an example of what is named the ERA 5 length reanalysis, that is a downscaling at a higher resolution that permits to go to 9 kilometers. And again, there are also other reanalysis products that are available at a higher resolution. And of course, those are achieved by having a better description of the surface characteristics like orography, the sea ice, the lakes, but also the use of local observations that are not used in the global reanalysis, plus high resolution models that are tailored to the region of interest. And as an example, you can see that there are available reanalysis for the Arctic area, but for the European area at a much higher resolution. So if now we look at the timescale of the future, so of the forecasts, the seasonal forecasts provide information about the next few months. So if the weather forecast is giving you, of course, the day-by-day evolution of the atmosphere, the seasonal predictions are the forecast of the entire system, atmosphere and ocean, averaged over 3 months period. So with a weather forecast, you can really answer questions like what this storm is going in the next few days, or this cyclone, the seasonal forecast is instead stated in terms of probability. So there's certain probability of being above or below typical climate conditions that are extracted from statistics of the past. And C3S offers different products. So for example, you can see variables here. You can see maps that are available, and it comes from a multi-model. So different models are contributing together to give this information at a global scale. If we look now at a longer time ahead, and we mentioned here now the climate projections that were mentioned also in the presentation before this one, of course, it is not possible to give a precise prediction of how weather and climate will change into the future, but climate projections are giving you ranges or spread of possible future climate in response to specific forcing, for example, greenhouse gas emissions or concentrations, based on our current knowledge. And those are produced by many different climate models and are given under the form of ensembles of realization. And together with these global climate projections, we offer also information at a much higher resolution coming from regional climate projections. So somehow now the question is, can we really extract information from those three typology of data for the energy sector, and how do those data appear to the user? So the data are available at our catalog, the C3S catalog. So, and in this case, when I choose the data set here, I've chosen one specific example data set based on the reanalysis for the energy sector. I find a lot of information. I find an abstract, I can download the data, I find the documentation, I find a description of which the output variables are, and of course, for each there is also an exhaustive documentation and examples of use. But then, together with the data, we offer also interactive applications that are used to play with the data, of course, to explore the data, to use the data without the need of downloading them if not necessary. And this is an example, this is a screenshot of an interactive application where the user can make a selection of variables, for example, the time scale, the product, and then visualize them. In the next phase, we are planning to evolve this service in order to be available at a global scale, because today is available at a European scale only, to go back in time, to include upgraded energy conversion models, and also include some more flexibility. And all these upgrades are based on requirements that we collect, because we want to serve a community of users and who is interested in having this information. An example of one of our users is the ENSOE, the Association of the 39 European Transmission System Operators coming from 35 different countries in Europe that need information from this data in order to produce their resource adequacy assessments under climate change scenarios. And of course, any of the application that is delivered is also delivered together with a software code that is run into the infrastructure where the data are located, that can be copied, reused, modified, and so on. So where are the data? So the data are in this infrastructure. The climate data store is a distributed cloud system and is a place where you can find information for the climate, past, present, and possible future evolution. It provides access to many different products through a catalog. And of course, there is also an infrastructure. In the infrastructure is also a software that permits to operate on the data directly and to build applications. So C3S is an operational service. We serve many users. Now we have 120,000 active users. And of course, we continue to evolve based on the needs that we collect from these users. And this is really operational, meaning that the data are maintained, but also quality controlled, that there is training, that there is strong user support, and so on. So what else can be found at the Copernicus Climate Change Service? So first of all, we have examples like case studies. So this is an example about the use of the climate model predictions now for the next few years. Those are called decadal predictions, and they're used for the hydropower industry. In this case, the focus is to use the forecast on precipitation over 3 different drainage basins. And of course, if you want to know more, I can give you more information. And then finally, another typology of applications or another typology of examples that we offer. So we have many successful downstream examples that demonstrate like this winning strategy of open access and quality data. And this is an example coming from a private company that is named Vortex. Vortex is an atmospheric modeling tech company that provides high resolution information about wind for the wind industry. And their clients are energy traders, independent power producers, wind farm operators, and they need the information at high resolution, predictions at high resolution, downscaled at very high resolution in order to operate and to operate their wind farms, to safeguard and maintain all their assets, monitor the energy production. But also there is need of information at high resolution for the past in order, for example, to assess the viability of wind sites when you need, for example, to construct or expand a new site. And somehow this private company is really heavily relying on our program by using the data that are in the Copernicus Climate Change Service. And in practice, as you can see on this right-hand side of the slide, they have also made a rough estimation and saying that thanks to those data, they have been able to reduce the error on the wind data of about 3 to 4%. And the rough estimation is that by changing and reducing the error of about 1% in the wind, I mean, by basing the calculation on typical projects, capacity factors, they were able to extract implications of savings of about $100 million US per year. So I think I will leave you here just to mention that in this presentation, it was not covered information about specific information about extreme events. So for example, resilience of infrastructure of extreme events. This is not available in this operational service, but it is available through other initiatives at the Copernicus Climate Change Service. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chiara. That was a whirlwind tour through everything that's available in Copernicus. And so you hit on one of the things that I wanted to ask following up. So if you look at the risk and how it applies to the power system, we have the kind of production related risk. Will the energy be there from hydro, wind, solar, gas, separate issue, maybe related with heating, but this is definitely where the Copernicus Climate Change Service is already making an impact, right? Feeding into the Pan-European Climate Database that you build together with ENSOE. And then on the second front is, will the assets be available, or will they be out of order because of an extreme weather event? And I know that a lot of system operators, as they think about the future, they're thinking about, yes, we could have slightly higher temperatures, which will force longer term changes in demand one way or the other, and yields from wind farms or so on one way or the other. But we hear this questions about storms, or no questions yet, but we hear these ideas about storms intensifying, and we hear about changes between cold snaps and droughts and stuff like that. Could you maybe mention for a minute or two how those extreme events, or what kind of attention or solutions you have, maybe based on ERA 5 or something else, that can help inform those extreme events? Because my understanding is that the data straight out of ERA 5 might not be that suitable for those extreme events, depends on what it is, but you need to do different reanalysis. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, it is correct. Of course, analyzing extreme events is quite complex. It depends a lot on the typology of extreme events. It depends a lot on the region where the extreme events are happening. It depends if you look, of course, at the past climate. It depends if you look at the future climate. And of course, for example, if you think at the data set of the past, like the reanalysis, that even being an hourly data set, it comes with a quite of a coarse resolution for addressing or for looking at climate extreme events in certain areas, especially if you look at the area where the orography, complex orography becomes quite important. In that case, it is crucial to complement the information with local data sets. That's the first important thing. So, and also to go where possible with higher resolution data. So this is why I was presenting for the climate reanalysis, both the information that comes at the global scale from the ERA 5 reanalysis, but also at the same time information that comes at the higher resolution for local regional reanalysis, like for example the European one, that again comes with a certain resolution that can be used for looking at specific extreme events. But then it is also very important to put everything, all of this, in the context of a large scale. So for example, on the one side you can think, okay, I'm looking at a specific asset in a specific location, and so maybe in this case it is much more useful or relevant to look at the local kind of long-term series or local set of stations or measurements that can be much more fit for looking at the specific extreme events in an area. But of course they don't give you the view of putting the same infrastructure in the context, in a larger context, because this is the only way of looking at different timescales, especially then if you look then at the climate projection timescale, where the uncertainty becomes much larger. And in that case, the uncertainty becomes very large, especially when you look at the extreme events. So the answer is everything is quite complex, and you need different typology of data interacting to each other, and a flexible system that allows you to do that.
Yeah, I think amen to that. I think that's a message that we would be coming across in several of our projects at the moment. I guess 2 more questions, but I want to remind people, if they want to put a question in chat here for Chiara, you can do, or raise your hand as Morgan talked about at the start there. You mentioned the plan to increase the scope, the geographical scope beyond the high resolution reanalysis data beyond Europe. What will that look like? I guess is the first question. Will it look the same, NUTS 2 kind of level, even though NUTS 2 is European, but that kind of resolution for the rest of the world, or will it be a little bit of a different look for the rest of the world?
Okay, let's say that at the moment we plan to extend to the global scale, and we are still, I mean, the new extension has not started yet, so we do not have a clear description of how the service will appear. But for sure, the new service should be consistent with what already exists, so you can expect a degree of consistency. And you can expect that you have information that is available at a global scale, for example, from the past based on the current reanalysis. And you can see, instead of think of the use of climate projections from different regional models across all over the world in the different regions at a high resolution, or coming from the CMIP6 projections at the global scale. So in some cases, for some of the energy variables, we also give information that is aggregated per country. So this is also an aspect that has to be considered. And very importantly, now we are starting to use this information also for monitoring purposes. As I was mentioning in my presentation, I was telling you that, for example, this last year, there has been a year with quite a low wind period in the Northern Europe. This was quite relevant. So kind of monitoring those kind of low wind conditions across different areas. For example, in Europe, this is where we focus, but also with data available for the entire globe is an aspect that is considered quite relevant.
And you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm talking on mute. There's a question about the ECMWF high resolution data. How does that compare to WRF? I guess, do you have a quick reaction to that? I know that's a complicated question. Depends on how you...
let's see. I'm not sure if the answer refers to the derived products, if the forecast mode, if you're talking about seasonal forecast projections, is not fully clear. I mean, the question could cover many different aspects, but I would say that if you look at kind of climatic timescales, not weather forecast timescales, now for example, seasonal forecast or climate projections, one very important aspect is, on the one side, of course, the high resolution, but to have information that comes as much as possible from many different models. That's one key aspect. So, for example, when you look at the climate longer term projections and climate, for example, projections that come from regional models, it is absolutely crucial to have all the elements that permit to assess fully the uncertainty that is associated to this kind of projection. And this is why you need there is not a model that is better than another one. It's the composition of the model that gives you the right answer. That's my first answer. Then, of course, probably the user is also referring to, or Liu is Yao Chao Liu is referring probably to the weather forecast timescales. That's probably another aspect. Of course, at ECNWF we offer forecast at quite a high resolution at a global scale, but of course then the different nations and countries, they run their own regional models, maybe to get this information for the forecast at much higher resolution for their specific countries. So again, there is not a solution saying there is the best model, and again, the choice of the model depends on the application.
Yeah, that's a good engineer's answer. Yeah, very good. Okay. Yeah. So finally,
much.
oh, sorry. Oh yeah, Icha. Yeah, very good.
Thank you so much. I like the answer.
Very good. The final question I had for you, Chiara, before we let you go, you see the different uses that energy systems come to you with, or use cases at ECMWF, and say, hey, have you got data to help us with this? And you also know what data is available. And I'm wondering, has it ever come across your mind, or have you ever wondered to yourself why the energy system doesn't do more with data, or with the data that's available, or if there are things that you think could be done with the information that's available that we're just not doing at the moment? Maybe that's putting you on the spot, but if you've got any thoughts on it, be interesting, because we always think from the power system side and never think from the weather side.
Well, I think that there are several reasons related to that. So first of all, I think that really in the last decade, instead, there is a community of energy users that start to really include information about climate. Depending on the application, again, you are talking about many different applications. And on the other side, the climate services have reached a kind of maturity. And so somehow I think that now this is the right time where there is much more, I mean, data are very reliable. Information about the reliability of data is there. There is a lot of effort, like those European programs that are really putting a lot of money and effort to make all this information consistently available to anyone. And this is really a huge amount of work that now society can start to benefit. So I think that now we are reaching the maturity where we can really make the best of those data and making them really a tool for a decision making. And a lot of effort has to be done, because we have to evolve. So it's not like I give you the data and you find the solution, but it's really that the feedback of the use should be in the data itself. So the data should contain from the beginning, in the design of the data you want, in the design of your model experiment, whatever, should have into already the use of the data. So I think we are going in this direction, and I'm quite positive for that, I think.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Yeah, we were always saying things should be linked together as well. So, okay, thank you very much, Chiara, and I'll pass it over to Morgan to kick off the utility side. Morgan.
Great, thank you so much. That was a great way to start. So really thinking about the data, and Eamon, thanks for bringing us to that question about how you actually start to apply it. And that's what this next portion of our seminar is all about, is how do you begin to apply this as a utility or as a power company and use it to inform decision making. So we're going to hear from two companies today. We're going to start with Enel, and I am really pleased to share with you the backgrounds of two of our colleagues. So Francesca Gostinelli, I'm so grateful to her. She's been very helpful over the past few weeks as we think about what we're going to be doing here at EPRI with our new Climate Ready initiative. Francesca is the global head of group strategy, economics, and scenario planning. And her responsibilities really include identifying and defining climate-related risks and opportunities for Enel in order to develop these strategies that address the future. And so she's the perfect person to hear from today as we think about what is Enel doing and what is their roadmap looking like. And she is joined by her colleague, Viviana Vito, who is the head of market strategy and regulatory analysis at Enel Infrastructure and Networks. So I will let them go ahead and share their story, and then I'll come back and introduce our National Grid speaker once they're done. And put your questions and comments into the chat. We'll capture them there. We'll do a full Q&A session with both companies' representatives after both companies have had a chance to present. So Francesca, without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Morgan, and good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for the ones that are on the East Coast. And we would like to start. I don't think I have the control of the chart yet. So to turn the slides.
I'll find you and get it to you. Hold on just a second.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. Yeah, perfect. I said. So we would like to kick off with partially also answering the questions that were raised in the first session. And thanks to Chiara, her intervention was really full of very interesting detail. So basically, we are here today talking about strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity, and we collect as a global community in energy all the pledges that have been maturing during the years. We might say that adaptation plans must be transversal and integrated, as it is mentioned in the SDG number 13, where strengthened resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related disasters is one of the key topics. We are talking today not only about natural and climate-related disasters, but also about chronic changes that are, according to me, were a little bit underestimated or not very much referred to in the past years, and that now are getting an overall attention together with the extreme events, because this might create disruption we're not thinking of. So first thing I would like to focus on is that we are talking about action plans. So it's good to make efforts to understand the framework, to start foreseeing a little bit how the future could look like, but then to implement action plans that cannot wait for longer time to be gradually implemented. This is not going to be all of a sudden. It is going to be gradual, and so it needs the relative attention. What I've been developing within the company. One of the answer I thought of when we discussed 10 minutes ago about why data are not yet so fully potentially exploited. I think that is in part covered by the complexity. I mean, climate models were not at hands for the majority of energy players. It has been pretty an effort to try to discover them. And we engaged personally within the company to make these at scale, to make this know-how more diffused than it has been, and to invest in coherence of different scenarios. Why is that? Because basically, we've been defining physical scenarios, both on acute physical impacts and chronic physical impacts, and transition impacts for energy transition and whatever transition, digital transition you may imagine for the path towards a climate resilient future and planet. And all these aspects might go hand in hand. So when you define a future that is compliant with an RCP 8.5 or 4.5 or 2.6 and Paris aligned and so on and so forth, you might ensure that at least the view you have is coherent. So you gotta have transition measures that are compliant with that temperature that is highly likely to generate a given trend of a single climate variable. So this has created a lot of work internally, and we've been pretty satisfying in getting step by step to results that are now usable within the company. So basically, we've been referring to energy system model, couple them with climate system model results, and we've been elaborating on raw data to get them specifically at a local resolution that we might use for assets, and to estimate what's going on the communities we work with and on the energy system we operate. Tools and metrics are many, different level of details, and one very important thing for us is to do what we're doing today. So keep the dialogue on, to investigate with experts in the field, with other peers, with sector experts, and try to get the most of all what we can do also collectively. If we go to climate data sourcing, as I said, we've been working with a scientific advisor in order to create our own set of data and the countries we operate and the countries where we are looking for additional business in order to customize and optimize what business needs. And that's another important thing that Chiara also was mentioning before, because the needs for data are a virtuous circle. So you need to understand exactly what you're looking for to get towards a given results. The challenges where that we have been requiring and building up a specialized know-how and developing suitable tools that might answer and might address the needs of the business to get more towards decision making. Of course, it's not just this the possibility. We might leverage on open source data. Copernicus is one of the other database we're looking at. We can go to private providers, and within these kind of choices, you can fill the gap. You can have a comfort of external expertise. It might be costing additionally, and it might be a proxy for what you need, but still you cover what you're really missing. And this, where does it go? Basically, we use this for assessing potential evolution in countries, location, in given events that we judge more priority than others. In understanding the possible evolution of a country economy, in understanding how resilience on current assets must be performed, must be ensured, must be improved as well. And the resolution is clearly higher when you go on assets that you already own, or local places where you have to build a building site or to build a new plant, for example. What is how we pass from scenarios to strategic decisions? Here, that's our story. Other stories might be different. For the global approach within the company, to build up a scenario and the consistency in between climate and energy scenario has been very important, because we've been trying to join the dots, and joining the dots mean for our internal counterparties more clarity. So that was very important. Ideally, we've been setting up 5 steps. The first one is the identification of phenomena that are relevant to the business. Different business might have different phenomena to look at. You see down there, down the chart, acute and chronic phenomena that we took into consideration with different relative relevance for each different business. Then we invest some time to develop the link function in between what the climate and transition scenario is saying and what happens on operation. So which are the consequences? How can I quantitatively link what is happening on the climate likely to what could happen on our assets? And then we identify risk and opportunities, taking into account the status of the asset, the vulnerability assessment, and we calculate potential impact in order to get towards strategic actions. So strategic actions are very wide. So basically, they can include business development decisions for choosing in between pipelines, for example, changing the investment valuation or correcting it slightly, build a resilience plan, and Viviana will talk about that in the next minutes, establish risk financing, and so on and so forth. The thing that I would like to stress is that when you start with this approach global, of course, it requires a lot of efforts, but it also can guide all the other stakeholders that are working with the company in understanding the phenomena and try to cooperate towards a resiliency goal. Viviana, I'll leave you the floor. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Francesca, and good afternoon, and very glad to be here in this panel. I think that, as Francesca was evidenciated, the broad impacts of the climate change require the capability and extreme social capability to manage data and to understand how we can manage the phenomenon and to understand the impacts to design at the best a plan that can answer and can tackle all the business vulnerability. It's clear that these assessments is very difficult. The projection, as also Chiara was mentioning, have a lot of difficulties to have full credibility, because it's not easy, and also the historical data that we have to now needs a lot of cooperation among the different players, utility and stakeholders, in order to reduce the efforts. But what is clear is that this phenomenon will increase more and more. The intensification and the related force majeure phenomenon is here, and we know. And the list of acute events is not only impacting one by one, but for example, most of us know, as last year, the February Texas phenomenon on cold was not only impacting the network itself, but also combination of other factors in terms of gas power created additional difficulties on the infrastructure. So it's true that when we look to also a phenomenon that is acute, and we also have to look into the chronic ones, the combination of several of these phenomena can also jeopardize even more. And we need to find the right way to answer to reduce at the best the investment that could be needed for that, and to create good capability to create priority in that. Most probably, we need a 360-degree approach, and this is what, as infrastructure, global infrastructure, we put in place, because it's not just to respond a phenomenon to recovery for the quality of services that then is affected, but is to start since the very beginning, probably since the design, in creating guidelines and methodology in order to have a network that is responding. It's also important to have a complete risk map, and this again is coming the capability to acquire data and to have data that can be based on historical and projection with a sufficient level of granularity, because for the distribution business in particular, the phenomenon is very local, and sometimes we can project an event on a large perimeter, and this is not really what will happen on a local basis on a piece of infrastructure of a piece of cable. So we need lots of capability to be precise in that. We need also to minimize the effects in determine a capability, for example, of vegetation management, because we know that the network, the distribution network, is very embedded with vegetation, and manage vegetation is also a preamble to manage also the resilience in the network, because, for example, the snow can increase and can exacerbate the vegetation problems created on the network when an acute event is coming on, and this is why we need a lot of risk prevention. Then we need also to prepare in terms of readiness. So we need to answer before, so we not just to wait that events will go on to answer, to respond. But we need to enhance the monitoring and also to create an advanced sensorization and automation in the network in order to be ready. And sometimes also it's very clear and important to create a plan and to stimulate it in advance, not just when the event is on, but to repeat the simulation whenever it's possible in order when the event will happen to be ready as a network, as an infrastructure, but also in combination with the other stakeholders like civil protection that normally are working together with us, or we can say better, we are working with them when an extreme event will occur on the population and the community. So this readiness also, this is the second step of this approach, is key and essential. And you need also to plan it, to localize, so we have a general global guidelines, but we try to implement at the local level to customize and tailor for the local needs, depending also on the topology of events that can occur on this type of network, on the architecture on the network, and typology of community that you have on the ground. Then there is the third step, that is the response, the most important one. So you need to have a prompt alert and fault management, and more your network has automation on board, and more you are capable to do a quick response in order to restore the in case. And again, also in the response phase, you need a lot of coordination with the other stakeholders, because you need to be able to do that not standalone basis, but with all the players and actors that you need to have on board. The fourth one is the recovery. You can say that at this point, the event is gone, and you need to put in place on operative side your plan and to have all the effort materialized, let's say. And so this is about how you create procedures to do that in advance, how you do training in order that people are ready to do that, and how you also create a cultural environment within the company in order that the resilient plan is implemented. And we can say that when we have our operator in this situation operating, we want that they are safe enough. And so safety is, again, our first priority, but we consider them a hero in some occasion. But we have not to remember to forget that the distribution business is a regulated business. So whenever you have this plan that is priority, you have also this main stakeholder on board with you. We can say that this is part of long-term planning about your investment. It's part of sharing scenario and modeling, not just inside the company, but also with the regulator to understand the vulnerability assessment with them, and also determine a cost-benefit analysis to correlate investment with the real benefits of this resilient plan. We consider regulation in Italy a front runner in that respect, and so the Italian regulator has created, let's say, an instrument, a framework to have the capability of guidelines, or having plan, 3 years plan to respond to resilience for each type of classified intervention in terms of typology. So we have the 3 that were placed on the table from the authority since 2018 about snow cable icing, heat wave, and windstorms, and introducing reward penalty mechanism in order that you need to respect a precise plan and project timeline and to respond to a specific cost-benefit analysis when you provide this intervention. So these cases has created a good possibility to incentivize and to adequate incentives to sustain the faster recovery action plan. Here on the right side, you see the 2021-2023 resilience plan for the distribution in Italy in terms of kilometers of network and in terms of amount of investment. The previous plan has involved a significant amount as well. Most probably, I cannot say that it's the only instrument in terms of regulation that could be implemented, but in any case, it's crucial that the stakeholder like regulator, are involved in this plan and understand the needs of the network, because we know that the entire climate change will determine on the network a lot of money to be spent, and most of the renewable and distributed resources will happen in particular on the local distribution, since we need to create priority and to address the proper signal. But it's very summary what we did as distributors in the country where we are. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much to both Francesca and Viviana. That was a wonderful overview of what you've done at Enel. And I have 6 questions, and I see questions in the queue, so we will get to those. But first, I want to make sure that we have a chance to hear from National Grid as well. So I'd like to introduce Stephen Thompson, who is the Environmental and Sustainability Manager for National Grid UK. He is responsible for the development of National Grid's environmental sustainability strategy, as well as supporting the global business to implement it, so no small task. And that includes approaches to manage the impacts of climate change across the business. Obviously, climate change, a big sustainability priority, but not the only. So, Stephen, thank you so much for making time with all that you have underway to join us, and looking forward to hearing more about what's underway at National Grid.
Thanks, Morgan. Great to see you again, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I think what you'll probably find as I go through kind of a high-level overview of a piece of work that we've been doing in National Grid on climate adaptation is that it will repeat some of the things that we've heard already this afternoon. So that outline approach that Eamon set out right at the start is exactly the approach that we're taking about aligning the climate science and the future risk to the assets that we have. And I think you'll probably also find that the approach we've taken has, unsurprisingly, lots of similarities to what you just heard from Enel as well, which is a good thing, obviously. What I'm going to start though is just by setting some of that kind of high-level context about changing energy system, which I think it is stuff that we all know, but it's really important to kind of set the scene as I get into what I'm going to talk about. So there are a number of different pathways to achieving net zero, but all of them require a transformation of the energy system. Electricity, transport, heat sectors will all need to decarbonise, and we'll see kind of fundamental change in all of those areas. And that's not just going to change the way that energy is supplied, but it's also going to change how we consume it. And I think particularly as we see that increased electrification in transport and heat. Technologies will have a role to play. You know, advances in existing technologies such as heat pumps or electric vehicles, alongside new developments in kind of the wider energy systems, particularly related to things like hydrogen and maybe the use of that in heating and industry. But alongside that, will also need to be behavioural changes. So the way we use energy will change in order to support that energy transition. You know, the way we fuel our vehicles, which is shifting towards electrification, but also the way that we use electricity in a smart way within our homes. And the reason I kind of say all of that is to just kind of set that seed of, in all of those scenarios, and there are a number of different pathways, the demand for electricity, particularly through the electrification of heat and transport, is going to increase in all of those scenarios. And so the increased importance of electricity networks in delivering a broader range of our energy needs is really, really important context. So specifically moving on to then think about, okay, those networks are becoming increasingly more important. How do we manage the risk associated with climate change? I think it's important to kind of state that, you know, managing climate risk is an extension of what we do as a business already. So we manage risk, we ensure our networks are resilient, and that's effectively, you know, climate risk is a part of that process. And I think the other thing to kind of point out is that this is not new, and we've not just started thinking about it. We've been looking at managing climate risk for a number of years. So, for example, in the UK, we've been investing in flood defences at our electricity substations for over a decade. And so this is an evolution of the work that we've been doing, rather than we're starting from scratch in this space. Having said all of that, of course, I think we'd all agree that the focus on climate adaptation has probably paled into insignificance compared with the focus on climate change mitigation. If you look at the recent climate change conference, a lot of focus, quite rightly, on reducing emissions, but we're just now starting to see that increased focus on the need to adapt to the changing climate that we're all experiencing. And I think another point that I'd like to make is that the plans for climate mitigation and climate adaptation are somewhat discrete. So we have to reduce our emissions, but alongside that, we have to plan for increasing extreme weather. And of course, you've got the trade-off there between local and regional mitigation plans against the global impact of climate change and global warming, and the need to adapt to that. I think where the overlap comes in is with new infrastructure. So I've talked about that increasing electrification of heat and transport and the increasing demand for electricity, which means that we're going to need more infrastructure. We're going to need more power lines. We're going to need more cables in order to deliver those energy needs. And of course, that infrastructure, therefore, has to be designed and delivered with the future climate in mind. So into the specifics then, a little about what we've been doing at National Grid. So kind of way I've summarised this is that this is about us using information to make better decisions. So as I said before, you know, previous work that we've done has been informed by climate science. It's been done on a probabilistic risk-based approach. But a couple of things I think are important. Firstly, the climate science has evolved since we first started doing that work. And secondly, the focus of that from a climate hazards perspective was probably quite narrow. You know, primarily in the UK, focusing, as I say, around flood risk. So the project that we've undertaken has really focused on kind of ensuring that we've got better information in 3 areas. And what we believe is kind of quite innovative about this approach is the scale and completeness of the scope. And I'll get into kind of some of the size of some of the data challenges, and you'll have heard from the previous presenters on you know, the amount of data that's available and involved in making these climate decisions. So the first one is relatively straightforward. We've updated our climate science data to use the latest available climate science. So we're using the UK 2018 climate projections. The second point is that we've broadened the range of climate hazards that we assess. So I said previously we might have primarily focused on flood risk as an example. We've expanded the list now to cover a range of hazards, and you've seen from previous presenters around what those could be. Those are things such as coastal flooding, high and low temperatures, high winds, even lightning strikes, and the potential future increasing lightning strikes are included as you know, climate hazards that we're assessing now. And finally, and a bit that we've probably not done before, is we have specifically mapped this to our own asset base and the locations of our assets. And I'll come into the way that we kind of bring this to life in a visualization tool in a second. What that's enabled us to do is to estimate risk based on the specific vulnerability of our assets to different climate hazards, so setting predefined thresholds for those assets to operate in, and then look at the exposure of those assets to hazards under different climate scenarios. So bringing all those 3 things together to give us that kind of notion of what that future risk might look like over a relatively short time for a period out to 2030, but then over the longer period right out to 2070. And I mentioned before, that means a lot of data. So we've looked at all of our main asset types across our, this is not just in our electricity business, but we've also applied this to the gas businesses that we own. And looked at how every climate hazard could have a potential to harm those assets under different scenarios in the future. We've looked at that under a 2 degrees of warming scenario and a 4 degrees of warming scenario. And as I said before, we've looked over different time horizons. So, you know, 4 distinct time horizons: 2030, 2040, 2050, 2070. In our UK and US businesses, which actually equates to millions of individual assets across thousands of square kilometres of climate hazard. And just to kind of add one final bit of complexity, we have to work in different temperatures in the UK and the US. Fahrenheit is kind of the default temperature in the US, and Celsius in the UK. So we've got an enormous amount of data, and the bit I just want to kind of finish off on is saying, how do you communicate the outputs and the results from doing all that analysis? Because, you know, an old school consultant's report would run to literally thousands of pages long. And so what we've developed is an interactive dashboard that displays results and makes the data accessible for people in our business so they can focus in on the assets that they manage and the data that's relevant to them in order to use that information to inform their business planning. And we realized as we developed the project that this wasn't just a nice to have, lovely IT, piece of visualization. It was actually an essential output of our work in order to kind of bring this to life for the people who really needed it. So what I've done here is, there are a number of different ways I could have shown this, but I've just taken one single screenshot, which hopefully gives you an indication of the type of information that's available. And what I'll stress is that, and if you look at the screenshot there, you can see that you can break this down into different climate hazards, different scenarios, a different time period, whichever business function you operate in within National Grid, and different asset types within that business function. So it really enables you to kind of target the information you need. Now, what the screen here is showing is kind of the evolving risk of high temperatures on our electricity transmission network in the UK. Now, the thing I always stress at this point is there are lots of colours on this map which show vulnerability and risk. And in some cases, they can immediately look quite scary. If you look at the graph in the bottom left in particular, there's a lot of dark colour on there which says, oh, that's high risk. That indicates vulnerability, that doesn't indicate damage. So this is not what is happening, this is what will happen if we don't have plans to address the management of that risk. Very briefly, what you're seeing in the top left is an increasing number of occurrences of high temperature under a 4-degree warming scenario in the UK. No surprise there, that's exactly what you'd expect to see. The map on the bottom left there just shows that in kind of a geographical presentation. And then in the middle, you've got the location of our transmission network, electricity transmission network in the UK. And then bringing those two things together in the bottom left, you've got an overlay of risk, which is shown in the chart to the top right of the slide here. And it's overlaid onto the map of our assets to demonstrate the assets that are in the most vulnerable regions within the areas that we operate. Now, there is fundamentally nothing surprising, I guess, on this chart. This is showing out to 2070. By 2070, we'd expect that increasing risk from high temperatures, which in this case is a threshold of daily temperatures above 30 degrees centigrade. What this enables, obviously, people in our business to do is to kind of go, okay, I can see now where I need to focus my attention, and then go in and look in more detail at specific assets in specific locations and start developing plans for those. Kind of overall findings are, I guess, in a whole, not that surprising. So all of our asset types face increasing climate risk from one or more hazards in the future. And you see similar trends either in the UK or the US. However, those changes could be larger in different regions under different scenarios. River and coastal flooding, obviously, particularly where we've got coastal assets, are probably one of the most significant risks that we face. And actually, by 2070, under a 4-degree scenario, you see that the majority of our coastal assets are at increased level of risk. So really, really important information that will help us to understand where the risk is on an asset basis and start to make those targeted interventions on the assets that are currently in place, but also thinking about the design of new assets when we're developing that new infrastructure that I talked about that's going to be required to kind of meet the different scenarios to electrify the networks. So just to summarize then, this is continuation of delivering resilient networks. We will continue to update this work because the science and data that we get is improving and evolving all the time, and it's important that we continue to do that. And we only have to look at what the science is telling us now compared to what it was telling us 10 years ago in terms of the increased level of risk. And we only have to look at what's actually happening, outside of our windows on a daily basis to know that this is real and climate change is happening. We're also then looking how we potentially expand that visualization to overlay onto maybe other factors such as socioeconomic indicators. So as an example of that, what you could do is you could look at particular parts of the country or neighbourhoods that are at greater risk of being left behind as part of the transition to a net zero economy, and kind of overlay that with your climate risk data to make sure that those areas are maybe targeted in terms of where you kind of put your investment. But I think the most important thing here that I've noted on this final slide is the collaboration. So it's really important that we work not just with other parties within the energy infrastructure sector, but with other infrastructure providers such as rail networks, such as communications providers, because some of the risks that we've analysed will equally apply to those sectors, and it's important that we kind of maintain the resilience across all of those sectors and not just in the energy sector. And then finally, if you want to know kind of a little bit more specifically about the visualization of the tool, we did kind of a live stream from the COP26 conference in Glasgow back in November, which is available to view on YouTube should you be interested in just finding out a little bit more about, particularly about the way that the tool itself works and how it brings that data to life. That's all I was going to cover today. So thank you very much for listening, and happy to take any questions.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm going to invite Francesca and Viviana to come back on camera. We definitely have some questions for you guys. So I'm just going to start with what people have already dropped in the chat, and then we'll go from there. And I appreciate Francesca and Viviana have been kind of answering questions in the chat, but we had a question about characterizing uncertainty, and I want to really make sure that we address this, and I'd love to hear actually from both companies' perspectives, because when it comes to projections using climate data, right, there's a lot of uncertainty. So how do you characterize that? How do you use that then to inform your decision making? And Francesca, maybe I'll start with you since I think you started answering this in the chat.
Yeah, sure. Morgan, thank you. Basically, what I wrote on in the chat that we know there's a lot of uncertainty, and the trends for climate modeling in the output that they offer us. So we try to work on output data and try to find out, eliminate the bias when possible, and try to find out the median value, and sort of define a range of possibility around the median, and then see how much change it does effectively imply. So it really depends on also whether the difference is limited or it's huge. So that makes clearly a lot of difference in your strategic decisions. So we think you got to think about it and first start with the data, and then get back to the strategic decision options and see how relevant is a change or a likelihood you can apply.
That's helpful. Steve, I'm curious, anything different from the national grid approach when you guys think about uncertainty, how you characterize it and apply it?
The only thing I'll add, Morgan, is, which I didn't talk about in the presentation, maybe should have done, is confidence levels around the different climate hazards. So, you know, I wouldn't want anyone to think that, for example, we have a high degree of confidence on the frequency of lightning strikes in 2070, because obviously that's impossible. But what we have got from that data is there are certain elements, particularly around high temperatures and low temperatures, that we have a greater degree of confidence in the data. There are other areas, and I've used lightning strikes maybe a little flippantly there, but also particularly around some of the compound events. So frequency and intensity of storms, and that's particularly obviously relevant for our east coast of the US business. That's quite hard to project the kind of frequency. We know that they're likely to be more intense, but the frequency, particularly where the storms might land geographically, is really hard. And so that confidence level is really important when we're assessing the kind of different levels of risk that we have on a different hazard and asset type basis.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love your dashboard, and I'm actually going to jump down to a question that Eamon put in to you, Steve, which was, how do you actually distinguish between medium, high, acceptable versus unacceptable risk, right? We're not going to be able necessarily to address every risk or build out, right? So where are the boundaries? How do you set those? That's like a key question, right?
It is, yeah. And there isn't a perfect answer, obviously, because it's a combination of some of the things I've just talked about. So confidence levels, it's a combination of, you know, the the different thresholds that our asset engineers set for the assets that we have today, and also kind of looking at what those assets might be in the future. And so it's quite subjective, and the way we've done it is really just to try and bring that to life a bit, to highlight relativity between different asset types under different hazards, as opposed to it being an exact science of, right, okay, this is the point where this becomes high risk as opposed to medium risk. There are lots of kind of things that feed into that. I think the visualization bit's really important, though. I mentioned it briefly when I was speaking earlier. The tool and the work that we've done doesn't give you the answer of what we need to go and do next. What it does is it gives enough information for someone who works in our electricity transmission business, for example, to go, I can see that it's this type of asset in this region where I should be focusing my efforts. So you can be very targeted, or much more targeted, in terms of where we make that investment, rather than, if you look at the location of our entire transmission network, obviously that covers the entire country. And so, as I say, it enables you to get in and be a little bit more granular.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I also, Chiara's asked a key question here as well, which I think everyone wants to know, where are the gaps, right? And actually, it's been really interesting for me. I feel like I've been in a lot of conversations recently with data creators, right? Sort of the climate data side of the house. And then there's the utility application. And boy, the gap between those two feels really broad, right? So with that in mind, what do you all see? And Francesca, maybe I'll jump to you again, because I saw you started to answer this question in the chat. What do you see as the gap? What do you need? What would really help to bridge these two areas in a way that really drives us forward more positively?
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. As I said in the try to write in the chat, I think that first, we are currently under a data-driven approach almost anywhere on everything we do, and this is very helpful, because otherwise, to me, climate models within private companies would have been very much an obstacle. But nowadays, these are seen as a very attractive set of data that might be used for many different things that really affects your business. So this step up and this kind of know-how spreading or dissemination, it's now part of the culture, and that's really helped in filling the gaps. Of course, we're not talking about data that are sure. So we're talking about options, we're talking about likelihood, we're talking about probability, and we need to face that we are taking decision on something which is more informed compared to the past. And thanks to that, I think we take the energy for considering them at full in the decisions from now on.
Yeah. Steve, what would you add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think, having that, greater degree of data to make more informed decisions is really important. The bit I would add is around what it hopefully does is helps to make more of those kind of the right decisions, because we're talking about investments over a long period of time. So if you can say under all scenarios, we see this kind of risk materializing, then it becomes less of a risky investment. Where I think that's obviously really important at the moment is making cost-effective and investments, because ultimately those costs are borne by the wider society and consumers. And we all know at the moment with energy costs, that's a really important factor. So the better data we've got to make better decisions means we're making the right decisions for the consumers in the long term as well.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I also, so moderator perspective for 1 minute, I'm particularly interested by the educational component as well. I feel like the more conversations I have with power companies, the more I see this challenge of alignment inside the company, because so many people have different hands in this, and there are, to your point, Steve, there are just like so many assets over such a big span of territory. How do you help everyone get on the same page? How do you plan together? And how do you bring your transmission guy up on understanding climate data? Maybe they don't need to know the depth, but how do you start at least a baseline education to like, here's what it is, here's how you connect in, and here's how we move. So I've been pretty interested in the educational component of this as well. Have you guys in your companies, how do you manage this internal coordination? Any words of wisdom? Steve, you're nodding, so maybe it's hard.
No, I'm not sure it'll come across as words of wisdom. It might be coming across as stating the obvious. But so one of the things we did right at the start of the project was I stand by this. It's one of there have been some real kind of difficult challenges over the last 2 years with the pandemic or whatever. But one of the real positives that came out of it was this way of working that we're experiencing now. And that enabled us to bring together a wide cohort of around 25 to 30 people across our UK and US businesses, which, to be honest, we probably wouldn't have been able to do previously. And so by doing that virtually, we were able to get not only the people who are close to this climate change work and sustainability work, but the people who are actually going to be using this information involved right from the start to shape the way we developed it, because it had to work for them. And as I say, it's kind of stating the obvious a little bit, but we got them involved at the start and got them to shape it. The second thing we've done is, and I should add to that, actually, it's surprising, or maybe not, but when you do that, a lot of people are genuinely very interested in this anyway. They want to understand more about the climate change impacts on our networks. And then just alongside that, we've done some internal training modules specifically on climate change and some of the science around it. It's just available for anybody as an employee, National Grid, to go in and say, if I want to find out more, there's a short kind of 10-minute introduction to climate change and climate science, which works quite well alongside that approach.
Yeah. Anything from Anel on internal coordination? You guys are so big. You've got so many different aspects to your business. I can't imagine.
I can answer on the distribution side. I think that's what is very important in case you understand to the people the response and the answer how the company is tackling the issue, inside the business. So what we are organizing is spreading around is the way we do, and directly with involvement of the management, and doing a sort of bilateral with small group of people, or enough small in order that these people can feel also to participate directly, to intervene and to cooperate during the meeting, and to let them understand which type of answer we are in tackling the climate change, not just a holistic situation, but in concrete way, the way we do. So the way we do the way we do investment, the way we do our strategy, and also the way how the network is responding, not just in terms of capability to hosting renewable and distributed resources, but also in being a CO2 absorber itself. So in designing a network that can contribute in that respect.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I have 2 more questions I want to ask, but also remind folks that if you want to drop a question into the chat or raise your hand, you can do that as well. I can definitely bump my questions out to get to yours. I do want to hit on, actually, Steve, you mentioned this on the last slide, and I was like, oh, I want to take that further. This concept of collaboration, right? So you actually talked about other, what I'll call infrastructure asset owners, which makes a lot of sense. I actually was originally going to pose the question around customers and communities, because I think there are a lot of assets there and a lot of resilience questions around how do you have a more resilient customer or community, and then what does that mean as you're planning and thinking about the system. So maybe if you could just share a little bit more, or take us a little deeper into the collaboration piece, Steve, and then I would ask the same of Anel. What are you doing in terms of collaborating with others when you think about your planning?
Yeah, sure, Morgan. So I think just building on what I said earlier, I think it's great if the electricity network continues to operate, but if alongside that your communications networks aren't working and other infrastructure working, then then that's not the solution obviously we want. And so so working more collaboratively and identifying where the risks. So the risk that we've identified might also translate to other sectors is important. And so that's definitely one of the things that we're looking at. Just to build on kind of your communities bit as well. I mean, it's very early in our thinking of how we might approach that, but that idea of ensuring resilience for particularly vulnerable communities and those that could be adversely affected by the transition if we don't make it a fair transition, and particularly when you've got that greater or potential greater reliance on electricity for your heat and your transport and other things. I think that's a really important aspect. And it's interesting, we had one or two conversations at the climate change conference around this with people who kind of visited the area that we had as National Grid, and that came out in some of those conversations about this would be a really interesting idea to look at. So that's definitely something we're going to be exploring.
Yeah, we're definitely thinking about that here at the Institute as well, because the reality is vulnerable communities and historically disadvantaged communities experience outages differently than their more affluent neighbors, right? It's just how it, right? So how do you use that to inform your thinking and inform your planning? It's an excellent, I think, point. So really interested to see what happens with National Grid as you think about that. Francesca and Viviana, big picture collaboration, just transition layer on top. I know you guys think a lot about that as well. Curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I'll say, Morgan, that we really work in close connection with all stakeholders. And as Viviana was saying, the infrastructure of the grids is within our territories, within concessions area, and for customers themselves, so to keep up with the quality of the service we provide. So it is also through the regulators a very shared approach. Overall, I think, especially on this, on the verge of having adaptation plans that are more and more understood by the community, this will grow for sure, as it has been growing both on sustainability plans and mitigation plans. So mitigation plans for us are overwhelming our relationship with customers and communities and cities to get towards net zero. It's an overall comprehensive strategy, and that the same will be for the adaptation plan. But I leave the floor to Vivi because she can elaborate a little bit on that, on distribution maybe.
No, and again, just to give a quick snapshot, it's about regulators, customers, and also local institutions, it's also with other sector, because normally when you do the plan, it's really that you engage the entire community. So the more you do this in advance, in the readiness, more in the response phase, you will be able to let understand the effort we are doing. And although the case, really the people of the distribution are recognized by the citizen and community when this type of unfortunate event can happen, and also the cooperation could be more quick and capable to respond. So I think also in practical terms about that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Give another question on the dashboard, which people love. Everyone loves the dashboard, right? An interesting question about data quality. So important, right? I feel like, and Francesca knows this, that I've been thinking about quality for a long time. We were talking data availability, data suitability, but there is a quality aspect of this. And I wonder how you're dealing with that as you think about vulnerability in your dashboard.
The ways we kind of deal with that, there are two ways really. The first is that by involving people from the very start, then they kind of understand the process, they understand the strengths of the approach, they also understand the bits that, where we've got less confidence in the data. And the second is that kind of reinforcing that the dashboard doesn't give you the answer. What it does, it says, this is where I need to start looking for the answer. And, I mentioned when I was presenting that, what we don't want to produce is a 1,000-page report data with but of course, sitting behind the dashboard, there is a big report and there is a lot of data that people can access. The difference being they can go in and access the bit that's specific to them and know where to find it. And that will then help them to understand the levels of certainty around some of the data that is being projected to them for their specific information for their business unit. So that's kind of how we do it at the moment. But come back to that point of this will continue to evolve, and so we're looking for for different ways of displaying this data to make it better. But that will come from people using it. So we'll get feedback from people using it, and so on things like that we should hopefully be able to start including them as and when we go forward.
Yeah, that's perfect. All right, final question, which points to how do we move ahead? This is an iterative journey. there's so much changing. The data itself is changing, your systems are changing, customer behaviors and the way they expect energy services is changing. How do you account for that when you think about your journey on climate assessment? Is this an annual update? Is this a continually updated process? Is it every 5 years? How do you think about keeping this fresh, keeping it relevant, and properly accounting for change?
Morgan, I can try to answer that. Basically, as you said, that's a journey. So, in my opinion, we still get going to the global comprehensive plan, which is still an achievement for a big company active in 30 geographies. So that's very important. Of course, we have more struggles, as Steve was saying before, with some data than others. And so the work is never ending. And additional, we got a lot of additional reports this year from IPCC, and we try to integrate whatever new comes out in our studies and to refine them with evidence from the present as well. So that's for sure. It's get going for and it's continuous. I wouldn't say once every year as a plan, for sure once every year, yes, but it's continuous as an activities.
Great.
Yeah.
Steve, what about National Grid?
Yeah, completely agree. I think the climate science, the climate hazard data will continue to evolve. Obviously, the bit that we've got more certainty over, or certainly more knowledge over, is our asset base. So that will continue to evolve, but that is obviously more incrementally. The bit that we're trying to make sure that we can do is, just from an IT perspective, make sure that the tool we've developed is easy enough to update, so that we can upload new data sets and update it, and that it doesn't become a one-off exercise that they need to repeat the whole exercise in a few years' time. That it can, to Francesca's point, just be a continuous cycle rather than, right, we've got to do another project, start from scratch and do it all again.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We've been talking about the importance of consistency and replicability just in terms of, getting buy-in from across the industry on how to do this, but you actually raise a really important efficiency point here too. Replicability in actually being able to just feed data in and update quickly is a really interesting point as well. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I have blown past our time because I was enjoying this conversation so much. So thank you so much to the three of you. These insights have been wonderful. It's so interesting to hear about what your companies are doing. We really appreciate your time. So thank you. And there may be more questions in the chat. You might want to take a read through, but I'm going to turn it back to Eamon, who's going to talk a little bit more about where can we go when it comes to the European conversation overall, and then I'll wrap it up to talk about our new Climate Ready initiative. So Eamon, why don't you go ahead and jump right in?
Thank you very much, Morgan, and thanks to the panelists. That was a great discussion, great overview of how the utility world is thinking about the challenges that we face. And so what I wanted to do over the next couple of minutes is to understand maybe what are the options to develop upon the work that's already been done to make it more useful, improve that replicability, address the issues that were raised with regards to the quality and the reliability of the results that we're getting out of climate assessment studies. And so first of all, I wanted to start by acknowledging that there's an awful lot of national projects that have already happened, or utility specific projects beyond those which maybe have been mentioned in the earlier by our Enel and National Grid colleagues. I see Robin Priest is on as well from University of Manchester. Now Robin and Matthias Pantelli have done a lot of work more at the research stage, models, formulations to be able to try and build up a picture of what happens to the system under these types of conditions. Several others have been working on this, but there's a lot of projects, as I said, that have been completed. Just had a quick look at the Smarter Grids portal this morning on the ENA's website. You get a readout of distribution and transmission focused projects to try and assess at a system level and at an asset level in a planning time frame and in an operational time frame, how to go about mitigating various aspects of system risks. So I suspect this MIVOR project had something to do with what Steve mentioned earlier. We're also seeing, you know, in the pan-European phase, I love the terminology that Francesca used earlier, the difference between acute and chronic type stresses. And so I guess for maybe more the chronic type stress, Europe mandates a single approach on pan-European basis to conducting resource adequacy. So ACER has mandated NSOE to update their European resource adequacy assessment methodology to include the impact of a changing climate in that assessment. And that helps because it looks at multiple different countries, uses the same data set, actually based on the ECMWF to tie it in. And then wants to look forward, say, well, how does this evolve in future? How important is cross-border transmission, sector coupling, and so on? How big a role do they play in ensuring future adequacy? So we know that the ERAA, the European Resource Adequacy Assessment Methodology, has to go that way. And we've kind of seen a view of how that might come to pass recently in Belgium, with the transmission system operator Elia collaborating with RTE International and with Meteo France to try and look at those climate model projections for future, build the data set back to be able to look at the range of potential futures that you see for adequacy assessment, which is quite a broad range of scenarios to try and have to evaluate, and then layer on all the other uncertainties around asset availability on top of it. So we start to see now how that looks, how the tools need to work together, the data needs to work together. And again, to kind of go back to Chiara's point at the start, how to turn petabytes of information into kilobytes or into a display that makes sense of all the ends. I think we start to see the shape of that with work like what EDIA has done, and which we hope to see in the ERAA soon. Then there's plenty of other projects happening. UK, Europe, we know that there's work in Germany, Scandinavia, in Iberia, obviously Enel and Terna in Italy have a considerable amount of assessment projects done, and work with their regulator at ARERA to try and make sense of the investment framework, the regulations to be able to put together to fund these type of investments. There's a lot of work that's happened, and that remains an ongoing conversation. We also started seeing it, you know, outside of Europe as well. So projects that we mentioned earlier with the Los Angeles region. We currently have another project going with the New York ISO New England, the system operator up in New England. And then there's plenty of other similar type assessments that have come or are coming to pass in North America as well as in Asia. So there's a lot going, and so interested to hear about any projects or things that you have going in the chat. Maybe if there's an initiative, there's things like the CGRAE working group. There's a CGRAE working group that came together to find some ideas about resilience, what it is, how to measure it, what the methodologies are. So there's a lot of that work going on. If there's activities that you're involved in, feel free to put it in chat. But I wanted to highlight in particular some opportunities around the Horizon Europe program. And so while we have great data from ECMWF and reanalysis on top of it, linking it together, there's work to be done there to continue to refine that. As I said before, to improve the efficiency, reliability of it, and to expand the scope of it. And so there's been some calls that have been put out and closed. We're part of some of them. We're not part of others. So closed calls here on the left. We should hear about what kind of projects will come out of those in the coming months, I guess, maybe June time. So some focused on specific technologies like HVDC, some focused on adaptation strategies in general, or sector-specific strategies in general, and some focused on reliability and resilience put together. And we've seen a variety of different proposals being put together for that. So we expect that there will be a pretty big body of work come out from these calls, whoever wins them, over the next couple of months. We know that there's also 2 forthcoming calls in the current work program that are about to close here. Well, one's about to close in April on energy systems modeling. So Francesca mentioned the TIMES model. So there's a call underway to update the pan-European modeling system that's used to inform policy and from policy all the way down to local area energy planning. There's an existing system called METIS. This TIMES is very pervasive around Europe. So this is a project that's out there to update that models to rather than look just at electricity, look at energy systems and look at how energy systems interact with weather. And so that's something that we will, we're part of an initiative on that one, and we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. And then for later on in the year, getting into more of the details about how to prepare. So in terms of long-term investment, but then also how to manage those high impact, low probability events. It's an area which the US has paid a huge amount of attention to over the years in the power sector. Not necessarily to say that Europe hasn't, but there's a lot of learnings that are maybe available from the US experience that could be brought to bear in there. Plus, what we're also learning about how to manage an increasing frequency of frequency and intensity of extreme events. Some of them are occurring in very inconvenient times for the power system, like during outage season. So how to manage those semi-intact systems. So there's some open calls that we're thinking about these as opportunities for collaboration. And then looking ahead to see what the European Commission sees, and obviously that's a reflection of all the different working groups around Europe. So we hear NSOE talking about this. We hear ETIPSNet, one of the energy technology integration platforms. We see OCCO's on, who's quite involved with that. So we see the draft work program coming out around Cluster 3. If you know your Horizon Europe terminology, Cluster 3 is climate, energy, and mobility. And then within that, they've got different destinations. And we see quite a bit trying to address different aspects of how to go about planning the power system, the energy system more generally, taking into account the changing climate. So in Destination 1, focusing on the climate model, climate science, and its interaction with sectoral models or local areas. In Destination 3, which is really about grids and storage and renewable technologies, there's a specific call out there for further work on electricity system reliability and resilience. And then down in the buildings area, the energy efficiency area, we see the linking of climate, a changing climate, back to the solutions and the interventions that are needed, specifically focused on buildings and infrastructure. It's obviously being driven now in Europe, that conversation, by more than just climate, but also fuel security and overall resilience. So we expect that there will be considerable motivation. So some things to bear in mind. There's an awful lot going on everywhere across the industry. There's an awful lot of tools that have already been developed. And so what we want to do is think about, well, how can we effectively use some of these opportunities to build on that, to make these tools more accessible, more reliable, and expand the scope. So that's kind of what I just wanted to highlight very quickly, to say that there are opportunities there. If it's something that's of interest, feel free to reach out or mention it in the chat. Okay, Morgan, I'm going to pass it off to you for the grand finale.
That sounds great. And recognize that we're getting close to the top of the hour, close to the end of many of your days, and maybe you're getting close to your next call. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes to introduce Climate Ready, and then I'm happy to answer questions. I have one ask of you all, and then we can go ahead and close down. Climate Ready, so READY stands for Resilience and Adaptation Initiative, is a new effort that EPRI is launching officially in April. And I don't need to give you all of the foundation for the why. I think we talked a lot about it today, right? Increasing dependence on electricity as a final fuel. We see what's happening when it comes to the climate data. And so this is a recognition that we need an industry-accepted approach to climate risk assessment and mitigation. And so this 3-year effort is going to do just that. We envision that it will culminate with a set of guidebooks that companies and industry stakeholders can use to inform their own activities and decision-making, although there will be several deliverables that are created and dispersed throughout the years of this effort. There are 3 work streams. The first focused on physical climate data and guidance. So that is looking at what is the scientific foundation out there, taking a full account of the landscape. What is the data that is currently available? What is its suitability? As we talk today, what is the quality of that data? And where are there gaps, right? And where there are gaps, can we help set the specifications of the data that is needed so that in the years 2 and 3 of this initiative, we can work with data creators in order to pull those data sets together. Workstream 1 very much informs Workstream 2, which is that assessment. So with that climate data, assessing where are there vulnerabilities in the system today, what are the environmental factors to consider in the future environment within which the system will operate so that you can inform design basis for planning purposes. And then what are the suite of activities that can be taken on by an organization to address the vulnerabilities or the needs of that future system when it comes to planning and design. And then Workstream 3 is all about response prioritization. Once you know all of those different activities that you can undertake to address the vulnerabilities, to think about planning, how do you actually prioritize investments, not just considering the climate information, but also the wide variety of other aspects that a company has to consider when it is making decisions. Things like reliability, affordability, safety. We talked about vulnerable communities today in EJ. How does all of this come into play in that prioritization process? So these are all things that we're planning to take on with this initiative. The 3 tenets are what I'll leave you with: comprehensive in terms of the weather variables that we're considering, comprehensive in terms of the system, from generation, transmission, distribution to the customer, comprehensive in terms of operations, right? From planning all the way through operations and even response when something's going wrong. So very comprehensive in the way that this framework is going to build out. Consistent, I mentioned earlier as well, and talking with Steve, right? We've been talking about consistency and replicability in terms of acceptance by the industry and being able to have a consistent approach across various companies. But really like some of the things that we talked about today, also about replicability in terms of efficiency and keeping these fresh and recognizing that this is a journey. This is not a one and done when it comes to assessments like this. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of consistency that really came to light for me today as well. And then last but not least, collaborative. And this is the ask for you on the line today. We very much want this to be a collaborative endeavor, and we want the best global thought leaders that are active in this space informing the work across all 3 work streams. So we are creating what is called a Climate Ready Affinity Group. There will be technical working groups, one for each work stream, as well as some that are very specific topically. So for example, we have one that's looking at climate disclosure. We have one that will look at climate justice, right? So how do you think about just transition, but in the context of resilience and adaptation? And we'll stand up other groups as needed. So the ask is, if this is an area where you think your organization should be engaging or can contribute, we want to talk to you. We want to talk more about what this effort is. We want to hear about what you're doing and think about where there may be opportunities to collaborate. So very much welcome you to come to the table. So if you have questions, drop them in the chat. I'm happy to set up 30 minutes to talk to folks individually, but wanted to make sure that everyone had a little bit of insight into what we will be taking on starting in April and for the next 3 years. And then last but not least, this is not the final session. This is only day one of our European workshop. So welcome you to join one of the many sessions that we have going on throughout the next couple of days. I see that our QR code didn't come through. So what we'll do is we'll look to drop the link to register in the chat. You also have lots of emails that have come your way with the registration, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you're having any trouble getting involved. So thank you for your time today. Thank you again to our speakers. What an incredible lineup and a fantastic discussion. We are really grateful. And Eamon, thank you so much for pulling this together. He very kindly put me up front, but he is the one that has been doing all the work in the background. So grateful for all that you've done. Any final comments, Eamon, before we close out?
No, thank you very much to all the speakers. Very exciting topic, huge interest in it, and something where it's better to do this together across multiple different entities than everybody going off in each other's direction. So happy to be able to discuss it here in Europe. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon, maybe on another webcast later this week.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.